The emergency alarm cut through the operations center like a knife through silence, and in that fraction of a second when everyone froze, a voice came through the emergency channel, crackling with static and desperation, calling out a military call sign that had been buried in classified files for nearly a decade. Iron Fall, do you copy? Nathan Crowley stood near the back wall, a clipboard in his hand, his position so unremarkable that most people in the room had forgotten he was there. But when that call sign echoed through the speakers, something in him shifted. His spine straightened, his eyes locked onto the central display, and without hesitation, without permission, he answered. Ironfall copies. Vivian Lockridge, the CEO of Meridian Aerospace, turned sharply from her position at the command table, her eyes finding the source of that voice. She had walked past this man 100 times. She had never once truly seen him. Nathan Crowley lived his life in increments of 15 minutes. Every morning began at 5:45, not because an alarm told him to wake, but because his body had learned years ago that discipline was the only reliable architecture for survival. He would rise in the small 2-bedroom apartment he rented on the east side of the city, moving quietly so as not to wake his daughter sleeping in the room next door. By 6:15, he had completed a workout routine that required no equipment, just body weight and repetition, and the kind of focus that turned physical exertion into meditation. By 6:45, breakfast was on the table. Eggs, toast, orange juice, the same every day. Because predictability was a gift he could give his daughter even when he could not give her much else. Lily was 7 years old, with her mother's eyes and her father's stubborn silence. She had learned early that her father was not a man who explained himself, but she had also learned that he never failed to show up. Every school pickup, every parent-teacher conference, every nightmare that woke her at 2 in the morning, Nathan was there. He had arranged his entire existence around that single promise. His job at Meridian Aerospace was deliberately chosen for its invisibility. He worked in ground operations support, a position that required competence but demanded no ambition. He monitored logistics, coordinated maintenance schedules, filed reports that no one read. His supervisors considered him reliable and utterly forgettable, which was exactly what he wanted. He clocked in at 8, clocked out at 4:30, and never once volunteered for overtime. His colleagues assumed he lacked drive. They could not have been more wrong. Vivian Lockridge operated in a different universe entirely. At 38, she had risen to the top of Meridian Aerospace through a combination of relentless intelligence and an almost surgical ability to identify weakness. She trusted data over intuition, hierarchy over instinct, and she had built a company culture that reflected those values. Her days began with briefings and ended with strategy sessions, and somewhere in between, she made decisions that affected thousands of lives without ever stopping to consider the individual weight of each one. She was not cruel, she was simply efficient. And efficiency, she had learned, required a certain blindness to the personal. The first time Vivian truly noticed Nathan was during a routine inspection of the operations floor. A shipment had been delayed, and she had come down personally to demand answers. When she found the logistics coordinator responsible, she issued a rapid series of instructions designed to minimize the damage. Nathan stood nearby, ostensibly organizing equipment manifests, but Vivian noticed that he had quietly rerouted 2 secondary shipments to cover the gap before she had even finished speaking. He did not announce what he had done. He did not seek credit. He simply solved the problem and returned to his clipboard. For a moment, Vivian felt something she rarely experienced: curiosity. But then her phone rang, and the moment passed, and Nathan Crowley faded back into the background where he seemed determined to remain. 3 weeks later, the pressure began to build. Meridian Aerospace was in the final stages of launching a new autonomous flight navigation system, a project that represented 18 months of development and $200 million in investment. Vivian had staked her reputation on this launch, and she had assembled her best people in the operations center to oversee the final integration tests. Nathan was not among them. He was not invited to briefings. He was not consulted on decisions. He was simply present, as he always was, performing his routine tasks with the same quiet efficiency that made him invisible to everyone who mattered. But Nathan saw things that others missed. He had spent too many years reading instruments and scanning horizons to ignore the subtle warnings that most people dismissed as noise. The navigation system's calibration data showed a drift pattern that the engineers had attributed to normal variance. Nathan recognized it as something else. He had seen the same pattern once before, in a different cockpit, under very different circumstances. That drift had cost lives. He approached the lead engineer during a brief lull in the testing sequence, choosing his words carefully, keeping his tone neutral. He explained what he had observed, suggested that the calibration protocol be repeated with tighter parameters. The engineer barely looked up from his tablet. The numbers were within acceptable range, he was told. The system was performing exactly as designed. Nathan was thanked for his input and dismissed. He returned to his station, but something in his chest tightened. He knew he was right. He also knew that being right meant nothing if no one was willing to listen. His phone buzzed in his pocket. A text from the after-school program. Lily had a fever. They were asking if someone could pick her up early. Nathan stared at the message for a long moment. In the past, he would have left immediately. His daughter came first. Always. But today, something held him in place. The drift pattern on the display, the dismissive wave of the engineer's hand, the memory of what happened the last time he had trusted someone else to catch a mistake he had already seen. He silenced his phone and turned back to the monitors. For the first time in years, he chose to stay, and that choice, small as it seemed, would change everything that followed. Vivian noticed the change before she understood it. During the afternoon briefing, she found her attention drifting from the slide presentations and status updates to the far corner of the room where Nathan Crowley stood with his ever-present clipboard. He was watching the main display with an intensity that seemed out of proportion to his role. When the lead engineer announced that final calibration was complete and all systems were nominal, Nathan's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. When the operations director declared that the launch window was confirmed, Nathan's eyes moved to a secondary monitor that no one else was watching. Vivian made a mental note and continued with the meeting, but something nagged at her. After the briefing concluded, she found an excuse to linger near the coffee station where Nathan was refilling his cup. She approached casually, as if the encounter were accidental, and asked him what he thought of the presentation. Nathan looked at her for a moment, his expression unreadable. He said that he thought the team was very thorough. Then he returned to his station without another word. It was the most carefully neutral statement Vivian had ever heard, and it told her absolutely nothing except that Nathan Crowley was hiding something significant. She began paying closer attention. She noticed the way he anticipated problems before they appeared on the monitors, the way his eyes tracked multiple systems simultaneously with the kind of situational awareness that seemed impossible to develop behind a desk. She noticed the precision of his movements, the economy of his words, the subtle tension that never quite left his shoulders. Most of all, she noticed the clock. Every day, without fail, Nathan began preparing to leave at exactly 4:15, not 4:30 when his shift ended, but 4:15, as if those final 15 minutes required careful negotiation with some invisible obligation. On this particular day, Vivian positioned herself near the exit at 4:20. When Nathan approached, she stopped him with a question about a supply requisition that could easily have waited until morning. He answered politely, professionally, but she saw his eyes flick to the clock on the wall. She asked a follow-up question. His answers remained patient, but something in his posture shifted, became almost imperceptibly more urgent. She let him go at 4:28, and he walked out of the building at a pace that was just slightly faster than usual. That night, sitting in her corner office with the city lights spread beneath her like a circuit board, Vivian pulled up Nathan Crowley's personnel file. The basic information was unremarkable. Age, 36. Single father. 1 dependent. Hired 18 months ago as a logistics coordinator. Performance reviews consistently rated him as meets expectations, the most damning praise in corporate vocabulary. But there was something else in the file, a notation she had not noticed before. A gap of 6 years between his previous employment and his current position. 6 years during which Nathan Crowley had apparently done nothing, earned nothing, existed nowhere. That gap did not suggest unemployment. It suggested erasure. The kind of erasure that required significant resources and even more significant reasons. Vivian's curiosity had evolved into something closer to obsession. She made discreet inquiries through channels that most CEOs did not know existed, leveraging contacts from her previous career in defense contracting. The initial responses were discouraging. Nathan Crowley's background check had been thorough and unremarkable. His references had been verified. His credentials were exactly what they appeared to be. But Vivian had learned long ago that the most interesting information was often found in the spaces between official records. She asked more specific questions. She mentioned the 6-year gap. She suggested that Nathan's situational awareness seemed inconsistent with his stated work history. The responses changed. Her contacts became evasive, which told her more than any direct answer could have. Someone had taken considerable effort to bury Nathan Crowley's past, and that effort had been largely successful. But Vivian had one advantage that most investigators lacked. She had been watching Nathan for weeks, cataloging his behaviors, noting the small details that others dismissed as unremarkable. And one detail kept returning to her mind: the way he had reacted to the emergency alarm during a drill 2 weeks earlier. Not the panic that civilians displayed, not even the controlled concern of trained first responders. Something older, deeper, the instantaneous calm of someone who had faced genuine emergencies so many times that artificial ones barely registered. Nathan, for his part, knew he was being watched. He had spent too many years in environments where surveillance was constant to miss the signs. Vivian's questions had been casual, but her attention was anything but. He understood that his carefully constructed anonymity was beginning to unravel, and he was not sure how to feel about it. In his apartment that evening, after Lily was asleep, he sat in the darkness of the living room and held a small metal object in his hands. It was a challenge coin, worn smooth by years of handling, bearing an insignia that no longer officially existed. The coin had been presented to him on the worst day of his life, a commemoration of a mission that had succeeded tactically and failed in every way that mattered. He had kept it not as a trophy, but as a reminder. Every decision had consequences. Every choice carried weight, and some mistakes could never be undone, only survived. His daughter's voice called out from her bedroom, the remnant of a bad dream, and Nathan slipped the coin into his pocket as he went to comfort her. Whatever Vivian Lockridge discovered about his past, it would not change who he was now. He was a father. He was a man who showed up, and tomorrow, like every day before, he would clock in at 8 and clock out at 4:30, and he would be there when Lily got home from school. The rest was history, and history, he had learned, was only as powerful as you allowed it to be. But history has a way of refusing to stay buried. And the crisis that had been building beneath the surface of Meridian Aerospace's operations finally erupted on a Tuesday morning in late March. The autonomous navigation system that Vivian had championed was undergoing its final pre-launch test when the first anomaly appeared, a minor deviation in the flight path calculation, easily corrected by the backup systems. The engineers noted it, logged it, and continued with the sequence. 10 minutes later, a second anomaly appeared, this one larger. The backup systems engaged, but their corrections created a cascading effect that the primary system had not been programmed to anticipate. Within 20 minutes, the test aircraft was flying a course that bore little resemblance to its intended trajectory, and the operations center had shifted from routine monitoring to active crisis management. Vivian stood at the command table, surrounded by her senior engineers, watching the main display with an expression that betrayed nothing of the fear building in her chest. This was not supposed to happen. The system had been tested thousands of times. Every variable had been accounted for. Every contingency had been planned. But the aircraft was now 3 miles off course and showing no signs of self-correction, and if it continued on its current trajectory, it would enter restricted airspace within the hour. The lead engineer suggested aborting the test, triggering the emergency return protocol that would bring the aircraft back to its launch point. Vivian agreed, and the command was issued. Nothing happened. The aircraft continued on its errant course, deaf to the signals being transmitted from the ground. The operations center fell silent. Vivian understood, with terrible clarity, that they were watching a disaster unfold in real time. And then a voice came through the emergency channel, a voice that no one had expected, speaking words that no one understood. "Iron Fall, this is Sierra Base. We have a runaway asset approaching your sector. Do you copy?" The transmission was not meant for them. It was not meant for anyone in that room. It was bleeding through from a military frequency that should have been completely separate from their civilian systems. But before anyone could question how it was happening, another voice answered. "Ironfall copies, Sierra Base." Nathan Crowley was standing near the secondary monitoring station, his hand on a communications panel that he should not have known how to operate. His voice was calm, authoritative, completely unlike the quiet logistics coordinator they had all ignored for 18 months. He was speaking a language of call signs and coordinates and threat assessments that transformed the chaos of the moment into something manageable, something that could be addressed systematically. Vivian watched as Nathan took control of the situation, not through rank or position, but through sheer competence. He identified the source of the system failure, the same calibration drift he had warned about weeks earlier. He calculated an interception trajectory that would guide the aircraft away from restricted airspace. He coordinated with the military channel that had inadvertently connected to their systems, explaining the situation in terms they understood, requesting permission for a corrective maneuver that would require temporarily overriding civilian air traffic protocols. And through it all, he never raised his voice, never showed fear, never hesitated. He simply did what needed to be done. Within 45 minutes, the crisis was contained. The aircraft was safely redirected. The restricted airspace was never breached. The only casualty was the certainty that Vivian had carried into that morning, the belief that she understood the people who worked for her. Nathan released the communications panel and stepped back from the station. He looked at the clock on the wall. 4:23. He was going to be late picking up his daughter. That, more than anything that had just happened, seemed to weigh on him. The aftermath of the crisis unfolded in layers, each one revealing something that Vivian had not previously understood. In the immediate hours following the incident, she focused on damage control. The launch would be delayed. The navigation system would require comprehensive review. The investors would need to be reassured. These were problems she knew how to solve, challenges that fit within her understanding of how the world worked. Nathan Crowley did not fit within that understanding. She found him in the break room after the operations center had cleared, sitting alone at a table with a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold. He looked tired in a way that had nothing to do with physical exhaustion, and when she sat down across from him, he did not seem surprised. Vivian asked him directly. Who was he? What had he been before Meridian? Why had he been hiding something so significant from the company that employed him? Nathan was silent for a long moment. Then he told her that he had been a pilot. Tactical Air Command, specialized in crisis response and high-value asset recovery. He had been good at it. Perhaps too good. He had been given missions that pushed the boundaries of what was legal, what was ethical, what was survivable. And on one of those missions, something had gone wrong, not through any fault of his own, but wrong nonetheless. People had died. A cover-up had been necessary, and when the dust had settled, the man he had been was deemed too much of a liability to exist, so they had erased him. New identity, new history, new life. He had accepted the erasure because it came with the only thing he wanted, a clean start. a chance to be a father without the shadow of his past hanging over his daughter. For 6 years, he had lived quietly, invisibly, asking nothing from the world except the opportunity to raise his child in peace. Meridian Aerospace had been a job, nothing more. Vivian sat with his words, trying to reconcile the man she had dismissed as ordinary with the pilot who had just saved her company from catastrophe. She asked why he had stepped forward during the crisis when he had worked so hard to remain invisible. Nathan looked at her, and for the first time, she saw something vulnerable in his expression. He said that he had tried to warn them about the calibration drift. He had followed the proper channels. He had trusted that someone would listen. But no one had, and when the crisis came, he had faced a choice. Protect his anonymity or prevent a disaster that could have cost lives. The choice had not been difficult. It had simply been painful. In the days that followed, the operations center returned to something resembling normalcy, but Vivian could not shake the weight of what had happened. She found herself reviewing the incident logs, the communications records, the moment-by-moment breakdown of how Nathan had turned chaos into order. What struck her most was not his technical skill, though that had been extraordinary. It was the way he had prioritized human factors over procedural ones, making decisions that the official protocols would never have sanctioned, but that had undeniably been correct. She began to question her own leadership. The engineers who had dismissed Nathan's warnings had done so because the culture she had created valued hierarchy over insight. The systems that had failed had done so because she had prioritized efficiency over redundancy. The crisis had been averted not because of her management, but despite it. That realization was uncomfortable, and Vivian had never been someone who avoided discomfort. She scheduled a private meeting with Nathan, ostensibly to discuss the technical details of the incident, but really to understand something that the reports could not tell her. They met in a conference room after hours, when the building was quiet and the pretense of corporate formality seemed unnecessary. Nathan arrived exactly on time, his posture neither defensive nor aggressive, simply present. Vivian asked him what he would have done differently if he had been in charge. Nathan considered the question carefully before answering. He said he would have listened more, not to the data, which could be interpreted in whatever way the interpreter preferred, but to the people who were closest to the systems. The frontline workers who noticed when something felt wrong, the junior analysts who lacked the confidence to challenge their superiors. The invisible employees whose observations never made it into official reports. He said that, in his experience, the most important information was usually held by the people with the least power to act on it. Vivian recognized the criticism embedded in his observation, and she did not argue with it. Instead, she asked what he wanted, not what he expected, not what he would settle for, but what he actually wanted from this situation, now that his cover had been blown. Nathan was quiet for a long moment. Then he said that he wanted what he had always wanted, to pick up his daughter on time, to be present for the moments that mattered, to live a life where his past did not determine his future. He did not want recognition. He did not want promotion. He simply wanted to continue existing in the margins, doing work that allowed him to be the father his daughter deserved. It was the most honest answer Vivian had ever received, and it left her with nothing to say. But wanting to remain invisible and being allowed to remain invisible were two different things. Word of Nathan's intervention had spread through the company, evolving with each retelling into something that resembled legend. The mysterious logistics coordinator who had saved the day, the quiet man who spoke military codes, the father who had walked out of the building at 4:30 as if nothing had happened, only to be seen at his daughter's school pickup 15 minutes later with a calm that bordered on supernatural. Vivian understood that she could not leave this story unaddressed. The board would ask questions. The investors would demand explanations. The media, if they caught wind of the incident, would dig until they found the truth. And the truth, she knew, would destroy everything Nathan had built. She requested a meeting with him, this time in her office, with the city lights as witness and the door firmly closed. She told him that she needed to make a decision about how to handle his situation, and she wanted him to understand the options before she chose. Option 1 was full disclosure. Nathan's identity would be revealed, his past acknowledged, his contribution celebrated. He would become a public figure, a symbol of Meridian's resilience and resourcefulness. The company would benefit from the story. Nathan's career would be transformed. His anonymity would be permanently destroyed. Option 2 was controlled suppression. The incident would be attributed to a classified military cooperation that could not be publicly discussed. Nathan's name would never appear in any report. His contribution would be acknowledged internally but never externally. He would return to his logistics position as if nothing had happened, and anyone who asked questions would be directed to a carefully constructed official narrative. Nathan listened to both options without interrupting. When Vivian finished, he asked which option she preferred. Vivian admitted that from a pure business perspective, option 1 was clearly superior. The story would generate positive publicity that money could not buy. It would demonstrate the hidden value of their workforce. It would position Meridian as a company that cultivated talent rather than simply exploiting it. But she also admitted that she was no longer certain that business perspective was the only one that mattered. Nathan thanked her for her honesty. Then he told her that he could not make this decision alone. He had someone else to consider. He went home that evening and sat with Lily at the kitchen table, watching her work through her math homework with the same stubborn concentration that he recognized from his own reflection. She was growing up faster than he had anticipated, becoming a person with her own opinions and observations and questions about the world. He had always known this day would come, the day when his past would demand to be acknowledged. He had simply hoped it would come later. After the homework was finished and the dinner dishes were cleared, he sat beside her on the couch and told her that something had happened at work, something that might change things for them. He explained it as simply as he could, leaving out the classified details but conveying the essence. He had helped solve a problem. People were grateful, and now some of those people wanted to tell the world about what he had done. The question was whether he wanted the world to know. Lily thought about this for a while. Then she asked if being known would make him happy. Nathan admitted that he was not sure. He had spent so many years trying not to be known that he had forgotten what it felt like to be seen. Lily nodded, as if this made perfect sense. Then she said that she thought being seen was probably scary, but that hiding was probably lonely, and maybe the scary thing was better than the lonely thing, as long as you had someone to be scared with. Nathan looked at his daughter, this small person who understood more than she should have needed to understand, and he felt something shift in his chest. Not the resolution of his dilemma, but the beginning of clarity. He had spent 6 years building a life designed to protect her from his past, but perhaps what she actually needed was not protection. Perhaps what she needed was the truth, and a father brave enough to face it. The following week, Vivian called a meeting of the senior leadership team to discuss the incident and its aftermath. She had made her decision, and she wanted the people who would be implementing it to understand the reasoning behind it. She explained that the company would pursue neither full disclosure nor complete suppression. Instead, they would create something new, a position that had not existed before, designed specifically for someone whose value could not be captured by traditional organizational charts. Nathan would become a special advisor, reporting directly to her, with responsibilities that could not be summarized in a job description because they would evolve based on what the company needed at any given moment. His background would be acknowledged internally as relevant to his expertise, but the specific details would remain classified at his request. Externally, he would be described simply as a crisis consultant with specialized experience, a designation vague enough to be true without being revealing. The board members shifted uncomfortably. This was not how things were typically done. Vivian acknowledged their discomfort and then explained that the incident had revealed systematic failures in how the company valued and utilized its human resources. They had nearly lost a $200 million project because the people with the most relevant expertise had been excluded from the decision-making process. That failure was not Nathan's responsibility to fix. It was hers. And this new position was part of how she intended to fix it. She also announced several additional changes. New protocols for escalating frontline concerns directly to executive leadership. New metrics for evaluating performance that included input from lower-level employees. New requirements that every major project briefing include at least one participant from outside the core team, someone whose job was to notice what the insiders might have missed. The changes were modest by revolutionary standards, but Vivian understood that revolutions rarely succeeded in corporate environments. What succeeded was persistent, incremental pressure applied in the right places over time. She was playing a long game, and Nathan's crisis had given her the leverage to begin. After the meeting concluded, she found Nathan waiting outside her office. He had been offered the position formally that morning, and she wanted to know his decision. He told her that he had one condition: his hours could not change. He would continue to leave at 4:30, without exception, without negotiation, without apology. His daughter came first. That was not flexible. Vivian agreed without hesitation. She had learned, painfully, that the most valuable people were often the ones with lives that mattered more to them than work. Trying to change that was not just ineffective, it was foolish. Nathan accepted the position. Then he checked his watch, nodded once, and walked toward the elevator. It was 4:28. Months passed. The navigation system was relaunched successfully after comprehensive recalibration, and the incident that had nearly destroyed the project became a case study in crisis management that Vivian shared with industry conferences across the country. She never mentioned Nathan by name, but those who listened carefully could hear his influence in every lesson she drew. Nathan settled into his new role with the same quiet competence he had brought to every other aspect of his life. He attended briefings when his presence was valuable. He raised concerns when he saw patterns that others missed. He refused to play political games, which paradoxically made him more effective than anyone who did. Executives learned to respect his judgment because it was never clouded by personal ambition. Engineers learned to seek his input because he would tell them the truth even when the truth was uncomfortable. And Lily learned that her father's job had changed, though she was not entirely sure how. She knew that he seemed lighter, somehow, less burdened by invisible weights, more willing to talk about his day when she asked. He had not told her everything about his past, but he had told her enough. He had been a pilot. He had done important work. Some of that work had been difficult, and some of it had hurt him. But now he was finding ways to use what he had learned without letting it define him, and that, he explained, was what healing looked like. Not forgetting. Not pretending. Just finding new purposes for old pain. The final resolution came on an ordinary Saturday afternoon, nearly a year after the crisis that had changed everything. Nathan and Lily were at a community park, watching a youth soccer game that neither of them had any stake in, simply enjoying the sunshine and the sound of children playing. Vivian appeared beside them, dressed in casual clothes that Nathan had never seen her wear, looking like a different person entirely without the armor of corporate authority. She had come to thank him, she explained, not for what he had done during the crisis, which had already been acknowledged in countless ways, but for what he had done after. For accepting the position, for staying, for showing her that leadership was not about knowing all the answers, but about creating space for the people who did. Nathan accepted her thanks with the same understated grace that characterized everything he did. Then he invited her to sit and watch the game with them, an offer that surprised her more than any business negotiation ever had. They sat together as the afternoon light softened. Three people whose paths had crossed through crisis and emerged into something resembling friendship. Lily eventually wandered off to join some children she recognized from school, and Nathan watched her go with the expression of a father, who understood that his job was to prepare her for a world he could not control. Vivian asked him if he missed the life he had left behind. The flying, the missions, the call sign that still occasionally echoed through military channels when situations grew desperate. Nathan thought about it for a long moment. Then he said that Ironfall was a name for a different person, someone who had been necessary at the time, but who no longer existed. The man sitting beside her was just Nathan, a father, a consultant, someone who tried to do the right thing when the right thing was clear, and who forgave himself when it was not. The call sign had been a tool, and tools were meant to be set down when the work was done. His work now was different. His work now was watching his daughter play in the sunshine and being present for a life that was finally, fully his own.